Hi guys, Sue's here and I've got another video tutorial for you today. This tutorial is based around a project I'm working on for my next design team posts for Andy Skinner. And the idea of this really is to have a look at a stamp, just take a stamp and see what else you can do with it. So I had started off using the stamp on textiles, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I also wanted to look at how you take a stamp, that stamped image, and how you can change it. So I want to show you a couple of ways that I do that. So with this particular stamp, I stamped it out onto a piece of scrap paper and then I just played with it. So here you can see I've done some doodling around the outside of it, and here I've taken it to a slightly different level and created, I guess, a sort of a sci-fi image of a person. Now, once I've done that, if I then want to create that in one of my projects, the first thing that I do is take some tracing paper, and I've got the stamped image, so I don't need that. But what I will do is trace the rest of the image. Once I've traced the image, I'll then stamp my design. So this was using the Andy Skinner stamp and a black archival ink pad. And then once I've stamped out the image, I will then trace, and using transfer paper, I'll put my design down, hold that in place, pop underneath some carbon paper, graphite paper, transfer paper, whatever you want to call that, and then I'll trace the image with something that's got a nice nib on it. So for example, an embossing tool. So I would have used something like this. It's got a nice sort of pen-like image and gone round the edge. Once I've got the design on there, I would then go around it with a pen. In this case I used a Posca marker. And the next thing to do is to start painting it. I've had a lot of fun just taking these images, and really the idea of this was to do it kind of three ways, to show you how you do it basically, and then how you can change the image, something like this, or if you see something else, draw something else in it. But I also want to show you how to do this kind of shading around the outside of the image, and that's what we're going to do now. So the first thing I did was I took an Adirondack ink pad in ginger. Now this is a dye-based ink pad, so this is not a permanent ink pad. This is something that will move if you add water to it, and that's what I'm after. So I'll stamp the image again, and because I'm doing this so that I can move the image around, I don't have to be precise. I don't need to worry about the fact that it's a rubber image rather than a clear. Still, because the images are printed on the back, it does really help a little bit. But I'm just going to roughly line that up and press that down. Now I've done nothing to prepare the fabric, but I will be doing something to it in a little while to stop the ink spreading an awful lot and the paint spreading an awful lot when I add more water to it. So you can see I've just stamped over the image there. Now I'm going to come in with a watery brush, and I'm just going to drag in the colour. It's quite a wet brush, and you can see how it activates that dye-based ink. And I don't want to bring it all the way in because I want to make this have some kind of shading and depth to it, but I'm just dragging it in from the edge of the image into the middle. Not too worried about this bit because I'll be going over that anyway, but it'll just be fun to see how that works. Now, when you're going through fabric like this, which is quite thin, one of the things you need to be careful of is the transfer of water underneath. So just regularly pick up your image, dry what's underneath, and then come back to it. So I'm quite happy with that, but what I'd like to do now is add a little bit of interference paint. I'm going to add that neat, and where I've got the darker colour underneath, this will show up a little bit more. Now I don't need to dry off the image at this stage. I'm just going to go straight in with the interference paints, and this will show up a little bit more later on as the fabric underneath and the paints and the inks all dry. And I can just do that to the whole thing, and that will kind of give that a little bit of a seal. Now I am going to lift the image. You can see where the paint's seeped through, and I'm going to clean that up and give my image a dry with the heat gun. Now I can't do this too close to the camera because my camera overheats. So I'm going to pause that for a moment. I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've dried the image. I've also come in and given a wash over the whole of the fabric with some decoupage glue. And the reason I've done that is because it's a really good sealer. It won't stop all the bleed through as I move on, but it will stop some of it. Now while this is still wet, what I want to do is fray the fabric. So the way that I do it is I come in with a pokey tool, something like this. This is actually a quilling tool, and I just drag out the edges. And I just find this is much easier on my wrists and hands than trying to pull out the fabric the traditional way. So I'm really just pulling out some of these threads. And the reason to do this now before the decoupage glue dries is that once it dries it is harder to fray, which is great if you want to stop the fraying at that point. But it just means that you need to do this before it dries. So I'm going to come back to you when I've frayed all the way around the edges. Okay, so that's now dried and the edges are pretty much frayed. You tend to see once you start fraying whether you've got a bit of a skew with edging, and that's fine. You just make sure that at the narrowest point you've got the depth you need of fraying, and then you can trim that up later on. Okay, so that's faded a little bit, but that's okay, and it's gone outside the edges, but that's also okay, not a problem at all. Just to show you the stamps, the fossil stamp that I used, this one here, it's actually from a set of stamps by Andy Skinner, and they're called Fossils, and this is the stamp set here. It's one of my favourite. I love this one, use this one a lot. And if you wanted to find out where to get those, then have a look on Andy's website, which is andyskinnercrafts.com. And also you can find my other Andy Skinner design team posts on my blog craftyhumphreys.blogspot.com, so do go and have a look at those as well. Now if you're painting on fabric, if you're going to be doing a project like these which are never going to be washed, you can just use acrylic paints just as they are. That's absolutely fine. If you were going to use them on something like your clothing or bags or something that cushions whatever, then you would need to use something that would make them better for fabrics, because there are some things, for example the fabric medium, which works with the acrylic paints, and it just makes them softer, so you get a nice soft feel if it's going to be fabric that's going to be in contact with the skin. And there are also some specialist paints. So Soft are a specific fabric paint, so you don't need to add anything to that. Whereas with other acrylics, if you add a fabric medium, I think the ratio for this one is about 1:1. The new fabric medium from DecoArt, which is coming out, I think is 1 part crafter's medium to 2 parts paint, but I haven't got hold of that yet, so that'll have to we'll have to wait for that one. So moving on, let's go to the next step. So I'm going to pour out a tiny amount of Payne's Grey, and I'm really going to water that down with my brush, bring in lots of water so that I can do that there. And I'm going to work my way around the image. Now there will still be seepage, and if you want more seepage, just wet the fabric around it. But there's less seepage after you've sealed it than there would be otherwise, because what would happen is that it moves underneath the fabric. So this is a really nice technique for just adding a little bit of interest. And what I do is when I need to move the image, I pick it up and I dry underneath it. You can see the water that's collected underneath. So I dry it each time I move it, and then I just work around the image from the edge out, and I can build up on that. I can go a bit darker in places, a bit lighter. I don't really want it to be uniform. I want it to be a little bit of variation there. The wetter your fabric is around the outside of the image, the more seepage you'll get. And as you can see, some of the previous colour seeped through, but I kind of like that. It's not a problem for me. Okay, so I've got a nice little bit of colour going on around the outside there. I'm now going to come in with a little bit of quinacridone gold. So we're going to have some rusty fabric. Same thing again, really diluting that. My brush is still a bit mucky from the grey. That's fine, not a problem. Now this time what I'm going to do is pick up a little bit more on one corner and use that corner to edge the fabric. And where it's still wet from applying the grey, some of it will blend and some of it won't. Oh, wrong colour. Okay, so just fairly wet brush, picking up more paint on the edge, on one edge than the other, and that's the edge, the leading edge that I'm going to have hitting the image. And you'll see that the bleed of colour from the ink pad really doesn't matter. Try and use the same edge each time, it does help. Okay, so I've pretty much worked my way around the edge there, and I want to have a little bit more colour, so I'm going to come back in with the Payne's Grey and do the same sort of thing. Now I'm also going to slightly do a little bit around the face, and some of that will dry, so that will be quite light when it's dried. And also under the collar. And you see it just kind of makes those bits pop. A bit more colour elsewhere. You can even add a little, just to give the face a bit of colour. Maybe pop a little tiny bit of colour on the neck. And again under the, I suppose it's a sort of a helmet, isn't it, really? I've made there using the stamp. A bit too much colour there. But under the neck it would be dark, wouldn't it? You'd get the most shadow there. I'm going to come in with a bit more Payne's Grey. Tone that down. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. It didn't take long. Now, I'm going to dry that before I move on to the next stage. Okay, so the outside is a lot drier now. I probably would normally dry it a little bit more, but for the sake of speed, I'm just going to leave it at that. Now I'm going to come in and I'm using a little bit of burnt sienna. And I'm going to come in and do a similar thing to the helmet. And I'm going to work from just inside out. And this is just a slightly different colour to the quinacridone gold. Just to give it a little bit of variation. And then again I'll come in on that wet area, the already wet area that I've just done, and add a side-loaded brush of Payne's Grey. Now you can also go in and go again with a side-loaded brush, just go under some of the other areas that might need a bit more shading, so just under the coils of the fossil, and even under there, and again under the visor, if that's what you want to call it, and under the neck area. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Dry that off again. Now, before I dry that too much, one of the other things you can do, which is really nice, is if you've stamped out the image separately, you can use it as a mask. And I don't particularly want to do this next step over the face either, so I'm just going to cover that up a bit. That's good enough. And then I'm going to take a really wet brush, and this is the brush, this is my really roughed up brush. This is what I use for applying matte medium and the DecoArt decoupage glue, things like that. And I want to come back in and I want to do some splatters. I quite like doing this while the fabric is still wet, because then you get a bit more bleeding. And I just really wet that. And then what I tend to do is also come in with my tray, which has currently got decoupage glue on it, so I'm just giving that a quick wipe, and pop this into my tray before I go over and do my splattering. So bear with. Okay, so I've got my wet brush and I've got the image, and I'm literally just going to flick it. Excuse me, I'm trying to sort of do this with one hand. You can see my gorgeous brush. And the more diluted your paint, the more of a washed out effect you'll get. I'm going to go in and do the same sort of thing with a little bit of the quinacridone gold. I don't know what this is actually leaning on, but there you go. Okay, now that's splattered. Trays out the way. Boom. And I'll remove those, and that's where we are. Okay, so I'm going to dry that off and come back, and I'll show you the final step. Okay, so the final couple of steps are to just have a little look and see if there are any alterations you want to make. I think I would quite like to have a little bit more colour in this area, so I've just gone in and loaded the brush again, and I'll just add a bit more, and that's very easy to do, ever so quick and easy to do. And this is the lovely thing about painting, is that you can just keep changing things and keep going over until you're happy with them. Okay, so there's a little bit more colour on his face. Now for the visor, for this spinny thing here, I just took a gem, good old silver gem, and then I just took a sanding block and just sanded that down. And as you can see, that just dulls off that bright silver. You don't have to take it all off, it's up to you, but that's what I did anyway. That's how I did that. And if it's moving, just put a bit of double-sided tape on it, and that will hold it down while you sand the top of it. That'll do. So I just stuck that in the middle with a bit of Cosmic Shimmer glue. You could probably use the decoupage glue as well if you wanted to. And then to finish off the visor, I just took my Posca pen and just coloured that in. And I didn't do all of it, because it's quite nice to leave kind of a highlight, almost as if it was shiny. And then I would just go around the outside of any areas that you want to make pop again. if any of them, if you've lost the detail on any of them. Ideally you wouldn't do it when the glue's wet because that will really ruin your pen. Okay, so the video ended quite abruptly because my camera basically overheated. So I wanted to just come back and show you the finished item. So I've really gone around with a little bit more colour, and I could still work on that if I wanted to. You can see it compared to the other one, quite a lot darker, but I quite like it, so I'll probably leave it like that. Slightly change the face a bit with the pit with the Posca pen. Could even be maybe more of a Princess Leia. So this was the fossil 3 ways. So you've got the eye. I saw the eye in that fossil stamp. The stormtrooper. Excuse the camera moving. I'm standing up. And this is how it was originally, with a little bit more bling, and just a little bit of fabric to make it a little bit more feminine. So there you go. Have a play with your stamps and see what you see in them, and make something different. Thanks for watching, and catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.